Hello, my name's Anne Levine and I've been using a domestic knitting machine for the last 40 years. I started off just knitting at home and now I've got an online business called House of Levine. The knitting machine I use is called a Knitmaster 323 and it's still the same machine I use today. It's very simple, not a lot can go wrong with it, and you can get them for next to nothing now. You can still get parts for it as well, and yeah, it's a good old workhorse actually. With my tailoring background, I learnt to sort of see shapes visually, and shapes were always the thing that kind of turned me on actually. With a knitting machine, I realised that I was actually making a stretchy fabric that was really forgiving, and it's just a really nice way to create different fabrics by using different yarns. You're actually making your fabric and it creates different shapes, different textures, and that was just really exciting for me. So having a stretchy fabric, you can't really, it's difficult to use a sewing machine or a straight stitch by hand, so I started crocheting. So this is one of the designs. The single piece has been hand crocheted. I just use a really basic stitch. I just use double crochet around the whole garment piece, the whole piece that I've just knitted, and then I use a double crochet plus one chain to actually join the two edges together. This is stretchy, which is great because it allows the garment, because the knitwear is stretchy, so the seams become stretchy. It also makes it completely reversible. So this particular garment, you can see it looks like a feature, and then we can take it off and put it on the other way, and it looks like a completely different top. This is called the Little Born Top pattern design. Just stick it over the tailor's dummy, and we've got these long lines, and it can be tied or however it wants to be worn. But the main thing is it gives this whole edge, it keeps it flat as well. On a domestic knitting machine you always get a rolled edge when you've finished, and the hand crocheting keeps the edges nice and flat, and you can also add in a contrast to give it an extra feature. So that's how I do things. Started just making long strips because that's all I was at first could work out to do technically. Then I realised I could make all different sort of shapes. I could go wider and I could go in, because on a domestic knitting machine every time you take the carriage across you just knit one row. So if you've casted on 180 needles, just by taking a carriage across, watching what you're doing, you knit quite a lot of stitches at the same time, so it's quite quick. I started looking at regular machine knitting patterns and I couldn't really understand them. I couldn't take in the information, a bit dyslexic, it didn't seem to go in. So I started looking at the shapes that I'd been making, holding them against me, and I just thought I'll just draw what I've done. Because it might be easier, but I continued to let the row counter build up. My son David, who was 3 at the time, would want my attention, and he realised that I had this thing called a row counter on my machine, so going backwards and forwards it might have come up to, I don't know, row 360 or something. And he, clever little boy, if he changed the row counter and I sat back down to continue my work and look at my notes, then it would mess me up completely. I hadn't worked, you know, he definitely had my attention, put it like that. So I thought, this is ridiculous, I don't know where I am, I'm more or less going to have to start again. So I started doing smaller multiples of numbers as well, and I just started drawing a line. And basically that's how the visual patterns came into fruition, because I just made it work for me at the time. I found it really much easier for myself as well. So if I did get distracted and I'd got a basic drawing of how many, I put a line for how many stitches I'd cast on and how many rows I'd done. And if I did get distracted, I could just come back to it, look at the drawing I'd made, look at the piece of knitting that's hanging on the machine, and see exactly where I was. I often made things up as I went along, so then it was a visual kind of guide as to what to do next and where to go. So I'd use this method to make my bespoke garments for my clientele at the time, and when some people many years ago would say, oh, I'd like to learn how to machine knit. When I started showing them my patterns or the way, the designs I was using at the time, they'd be like, that's really simple, just follow this shape. So there's no text, no two things to look at the same time, you're just dealing with each block as it comes along. I used to give lessons, young people, I ran a textile centre, and they found it really easy, to my surprise. In fact, they preferred using the visual patterns, so much so they started creating their own. Just sort of my basic blocks, because that's what I provide, they could elaborate on them and add their own flavour or their own section quite easily without having to read any text, because it's all visual. You can see it, you can see the shape, you can see the shape you've got, and it's there it all is. So 4 years ago I decided, after many questions that people were asking me, that actually I would just kind of make it really clear. There's actually 10 symbols to the visual patterns, and rather than just talk about it, make some videos. And they're on YouTube, and I personally go through each key step and what you'll need to learn and practice to be able to make any of my designer direct patterns now and in the future. I'm not going to be wavering away from that. I basically use plain stocking stitch with just a couple of features, and that's all I do. My whole feeling and most of my creations are sideways knitted, and they're just simple. I still use the same simple machine. I try and keep the same stocking stitch, not too much pattern, and just keep it easy for people to start. Yeah, in the videos I actually demonstrate every single point. So that's how to actually cast on, and I call this key 1. I'm going to start off with key 1, which is how to cast on. It's a different sort of cast on, it's an E-wrap cast on, but there is a reason why I do it like I do. How to put in markers. Markers are really important, because when you finished your piece following the visual format, it's difficult sometimes to see where you are or what bit's going to go where, and the markers really help. They're represented by a star on the patterns, so if you see a star you need to put in a marker. How to increase, how to decrease, how to do something called a go day, which is shorten rows. For you hand knitters, you would have heard of that term, but how to make a flare in a straight piece of fabric. Some people call it shorten rows, but I call it a go day. But effectively we need to do a process on the machine. We need to bring some needles forward into hold, how to finish, what tension to use. I'm now going to show you key 7. It's just a T. Usually the way that the tension is changed is on the carriage, and it's a dial on this particular machine. You've got numbers 1 to 10. At the moment we've got it on number 7, which is fine for this particular yarn, but just by turning it round you can go higher or lower. 10 on this machine is the highest tension that we use for slip rows, and 1 being the lowest that we'll never use. roughly, we stay sort of in the middle, but that's how you change it. You haven't got to worry about that because the pattern will say what tension for you to have. So T represents tension. What yarn to use, and there's pictures as well of what different yarns look like in the same shape. You can have one pattern and it can look completely different depending on what yarn you use. So for lots more information and details about everything I've been talking about, the videos you can find on House of Levine. Also I've got another website, homemachineknitting.co.uk, and there's a lot more pictures supporting the videos as well. Yeah, the patterns are available from homemachineknitting.co.uk, and all the training, there's links there to all the training videos. The training videos are all free. They've been up there for 4 years, so been well looked at, and they're quite sort of complete. You know, I do explain each key point very clearly and demonstrate it for you to practice. Yeah, since the making the YouTube videos, I suddenly realised I had an online presence, which I never had before. People always used to come around my house, but that's not appropriate anymore. So yeah, I've had to embrace the whole situation because I can't even type, so I've had to learn to do that. I've now got a Facebook page, but I've really started interacting in it more with an iPhone. Fantastic. And on Facebook there's something called Machine Knitting, and that's been my main source of help actually from other people. And also I've got an Instagram page now, and I've noticed that more and more young people are really interested in machine knitting. The fact that they can make their own garments at home, hence home machine knitting. The same as I've been doing for years, you know, you can create something really easily and quickly. I've really tried to sort of condense everything I've ever done to make it as simple for everyone as possible. And it seems to be working. It's really nice that lots of young people have are enjoying the shapes, but it's like, oh, I love that, but you know, it won't fit me. It's like, oh, okay. So I've had to, you know, look at my own designs recently, in fact, for a 20-year-old, and she looks fantastic. It's really, you know, something I designed actually 20 years ago. Originally, to see like a 20-year-old in it now in 2020. I've had to change the pattern a bit to make the, you know, change the amount of stitches, change the amount of rows that are published, but I can do that. And that's my expertise really, actually, when I've thought about it, was knitting clothes and helping people to knit clothes that fit them. And it's really exciting to see, as I said, the shapes that I you know, made a long time ago now being worn by a young lady. They look fantastic. I really appreciate your attention, and thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's actually encouraged me to continue. I've really enjoyed the feedback I've had over the last 4 years since being online. It's given me a new sense of purpose. So I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for watching.